The following podcast is offered freely through the Insight Meditation Community of Washington and by Jonathan Foust. To learn more or to make a donation to support this work, please go to www.jonathanfoust.com. So this guy goes to a meditation center where there's this renowned master. And this master was known for being very clear-seeing. He could just see right through you. And he went to him and he said, if I come here to practice, how long will it take until I'm fully realized? The master looks at him, looks at his hands, and he sits back and he goes, 10 years. The guy goes, oh my God, 10 years? It's going to take, okay. What if I double down on everything you tell me to practice? I just double it. The guy looks at him. 20 years. The guy said, that's completely illogical. What a stupid thing. And he goes, 30 years. So Tara and I went off for our annual retreat at the Forest Refuge up in Barre, Massachusetts. And it's part of a vision from Joseph Goldstein to create a sanctuary for long-term meditators. It was originally this will be exclusively for people who just want to do a 6-month or a year-long retreat, give them the space to do that. And the center they created is just beautiful. It's just this Shangri-La for meditation. It's all very quiet and in the woods and so forth. But they also open it up for people, when they can, to do shorter retreats. So to go for a week or 10 days. It's quite an extraordinary thing. But retreats are never easy. And on one level, mine wasn't. But I learned a couple things, and I thought I might just share some observations with you. There are 4 things that I'd like to talk about, if I can get to it. The first is the quality of humility that's required when you engage into a practice. The second is how you have to be willing to work with fear, because that is part of the practice. The third thing I'd like to touch on is how you have to be open to truth. You have to want the truth if you're going to practice. And the fourth is about how you have to be committed. So I've done a lot of retreats for a lot of years, and I've led many retreats. I've done month-long retreats. I've done retreats in all different kinds of traditions. Living in an ashram for so many years, we would have world teachers come and teach. And as I was settling into this retreat up in the Forest Refuge, one teacher told me of something that Joseph Goldstein, who's kind of the founder of IMS, and I have such great respect for him as a teacher, but also as a practitioner. He completed a long retreat, and what she allegedly said, he said, was that what came out of that retreat was sort of this mantra, and the mantra was, I am not exempt. I don't know exactly what that means, but what I think it means is none of us is exempt from the mind. And none of us is exempt from death, which was part of the theme that inevitably comes up in practice. So I struggled with restlessness. I had some business stuff that I couldn't finish until I was up there. So I thought, I'll just do this, I'll do it on my iPad and it'll be done. I'll shut everything off. And there wasn't connection. I had to go to the office and use their computer, and it just really stimulated my brain, and I couldn't turn it off. And I just kept fixating on something my mind could do. One of the unfortunate things I didn't realize was that this forest refuge was being rescheduled at the same time as the Super Bowl. And only one sport that I pay any attention to is a little bit of football. They say the men mostly watch the sports they watch with their dads, so there's some kind of connection with it. But also, having lived in Massachusetts for so many years, you could not be part of that culture. And when I was actually working at Kripalu, my Sundays were like my vacation day. And I lived in a little mill town, and I'd go down to this little bar where all the town drunks were, and we would watch the Patriots. And they were the most enjoyable people to be around because they breathed those games. So I spent my Sundays jumping up and cheering and joining in the ruckus with the Patriots. So I didn't watch the game. I didn't sneak out. I didn't track the score because I didn't want to jinx it on some level. But I did check the score the next day. And my mind completely obsessed on the game. And so through my phone, I read every commentator's possible opinion on every aspect of the game. And I could feel it, this chemical reaction, like some chemical release in my brain when it was feeding it that information. And also sitting there with this hot little iPhone right next to me, practicing do not touch. It was a real challenge. Do you know that feeling? When your mind just wants to engage with something even though you know it isn't wholesome? When you're sort of like watching something stupid on TV that you know isn't gratifying your life in any possible way, but there's something that doesn't turn it off. It's a fascinating place to pay attention. And I knew that there was something underneath that not paying attention that had something to do with fear. So in the practice, as you know, when you have an intention to be present in non-judging awareness, you instantly notice everything that is not. So all of the aversions, all of the obstacles were part of my experience as well. One of my favorite things of going up there is hiking in these woods, these incredible trails that go through these old New England farms, and the light, and it's just beautiful out there. There was 3 feet of snow, so I couldn't do that. The last time I went, they gave me the job as pot washer, which is a really intense job. You scrub all of the pots. And sometimes I swear that people bring them from home, just to add to it. And so this time when I went, I was pot washer. And so part of my brain was like, now they have me marked. I'm going to be a pot washer for life every time I come back here. And I actually enjoyed pot washing, but a lot of falling asleep, just my exhaustion was part of my experience, my addiction to planning. And then just sort of doubt, what am I could be a club med. Why am I at, club meditation? Questioning the technique, all of that. But one of the other aspects that I saw, and I know we all experienced this, but I couldn't get away from my thoughts. My thoughts were just commenting on everything, I'll talk about that in a little bit. But also, I would notice that I would be in sort of dream states or semi-dream states. Sometimes you're waking up in the morning and you have that experience of like, you're totally believing your dream. Then you wake up and it's like, oh my God, that was just a dream. Like sort of more aware of those moments of when my awareness was hitched to some play out of some thought form. And there was a quality of it becoming relentless. How do you get away from this constant flow of phenomena? So part of the struggle was sort of staying with it. The other quality around the willingness to face fear means that you have to be able to face your demons. A psychologist friend of mine admitted to me, he said, when I'm really fed up with a client, or just feel like they're just spinning, I'll just say something like, so how do you feel about your death? That always creates a shift we can start working with. Our fears tend to kind of fall in the category of survival, or the fear of losing control, or the fear of losing affection, attention, and love. And as I was just sensing, what is this anxiety? I just thought, this is where I want to pay attention. And I could sort of, feel it at different times, but I finally, something kind of like, it kind of clicked for me. And I said, let's stop wasting time. What about fear of death? And so that became a contemplation in my practice. I was honored to be asked to speak this morning for the memorial for Dennis, and he found the practices and the talks really helpful, and was really feeling a real shift in his life, and then got a brain cancer, I understand, and was able to sort of use the practices as a very helpful way for him to navigate through his life. And it was just so powerful to meet everyone, to meet his family, and others are kind of checking out the practice too, which is really cool. One of the main teachings of the Buddha was speaking of the heavenly messengers. That when you experience the heavenly messengers, they affect you, but if you can let them in, they transform you. The heavenly messengers of sickness, old age, and death. And the fourth heavenly messenger the Buddha observed was a renunciate, was someone who was fully engaged in the spiritual practice. That's the other heavenly messenger. But we have so many ways of turning away from the fact of our personal mortality. As I've talked with some people say, I just don't go there. I just tell myself, dying, that's for other people. So I chose to go there, mostly because it seems so related to this restless mind of mine. And I've had the good fortune of being in relationship with death from early on, because I grew up on a farm. So I remember my job at 6 or maybe 6 was taking dead lambs up to the hill to leave out for the vultures. And seeing life and death on the farm was really part of it. And later years I managed a farm and had to personally dispatch animals. I also grew up in a hunting culture. So that, for me, revisiting that experience of seeing an animal take its last breath, and seeing the body move from something animated to no longer animated. I've shared the story here in the past of a good friend who died in my arms on our way to the hospital, and an extraordinary gift to be in that sort of resonant field with him. Another person who I ended up caring for, and again, the process of letting go. And in recent years, my father, my mother, my mother-in-law, a bunch of dogs, that. But for me, there was something about seeing it externally, but really inquiring, okay, internally. Intellectually, I know this, that everything born out of causes and conditions is subject to fall away. But to really drop myself into the willingness to turn toward it. So the Buddha spoke of how when you open your attention to sickness, old age, and death, it reveals these truths. And of course, when he said this, he also said, don't believe what I'm telling you. You have to find if this isn't true in your experience. But you see into the truth of impermanence, how everything is changing and shifting. Anything born out of causes and conditions is changing. Anything you try to hold on to, which leads to the second truth, anything you try to hold on to is going to result in some form of dissatisfaction or stress or suffering, is a broad term. And the third truth that you can experience is an insight into who you truly are. What is that which is beyond the body and your thoughts and your beliefs? That quality of the teaching of not self or anatta. So the last time I saw Dennis was his daughter Adrian had brought him to class and he was in a wheelchair. And obviously looked very weak. He had difficulty speaking, but I saw in his eyes someone who was letting go. Someone who was going through the steps of, okay, I've got to say goodbye. And there's something about that letting go, that falling away, that has a quality of sadness, the quality of the ouch, quality of the pain of letting something go. But there's also a lightening that occurs. There's more room for joy and gratitude, and I could see that. I could see that in his eyes, and the love that he had for his daughter, who was caring for him, and the space they were holding together. So you notice that the mind doesn't stop. It's always commenting. It always has something to say. But there's another quality of who you are as the observer of that conversation. And that's a very interesting place to reflect on. What is that quality of awareness? Many traditions will call it the witness, your capacity to self-observe. And much about it is seeing how you can shift from your story to the direct experience more and more quickly. You begin to see how you're identified with a thought, but then you recognize that thought. Wait a minute, that's the same thought that came cycling through here not too long ago. And in that sort of self-recognizing process, there is a quality of freedom that can begin to emerge. I know we've all experienced this at different times. So for me, in contemplating letting go was a process of my wife, of recognizing that one day one of us will go in no particular order, under Under no circumstance are there exceptions to that rule. How does my body hold that? How does my heart hold that? So it was a very powerful process of softening. When you think of all those you've encountered, and you reflect on their inevitable death, it can reframe how we hold them. So learning to identify the thinking process and recognizing it simply as a filter that you're looking through can be quite helpful. You begin to see there are different parts, there are different voices. And at the same time, there's more and more a sense of presence, and more the possibility of what is this space is holding my experience. And an interesting thing about the practice is how the more you can relax your relationship with the mind, the less run you feel by it. But you also notice perhaps an inner quality of peace, a spaciousness that begins to emerge. And inevitably what happens in a practice, a transformational practice, is that your relationship to life emerges. And you begin to recognize in your sensitivity with more and more delicacy and discrimination, you begin to see the attitudes in your mind. You begin to see the beliefs that might limit you or hold you back. And you also become aware of how your body is holding your experience. The more this faculty develops in your practice, the more you can find ways to work with that. But sometimes the feelings, the energy that arises in a practice can be very, very challenging. Your deepest fears will eventually arise. The shadow emerges. What is undigested in your life will naturally come forward to be seen and held and ultimately to be released. So a large part of the practice, as I've come to see it, is how you work with the challenges that arise. How you work with physical pain, how you work with strong emotional states, strong mental states. They tend to come in waves. The more you sensitize yourself to not only what is happening, but your experience of what's happening, the more you become aware of things that you weren't maybe aware of before. You know, a nuance of feeling. You know, recognizing, well, there's anger, yes, but also there's some hurt and some disappointment. You know, our neurological bandwidth can open up a little bit. But you also see more clearly your habitual ways of reacting, your habitual ways of controlling or shutting down your life. And that became more clear to me in my practice. I've always had sort of a life issue around feeling like I don't belong. It has to do with early tracks that were laid down as a kid, and I seem to have found reinforcing evidence, you know, to that. I always am the one who steps away. Or as I tend to joke sometimes, the only groups I have anything to do with are the ones I'm controlling. So it's great to be here with you. Don't anyone say anything. But in my practice, I began to explore that belief. Because I was seeing that it was limiting me somehow. And as I sat with it over time, just sensing how that felt on the inside, kind of bringing kind attention to it, I could sort of track it back to a very, very tender, very vulnerable time in my life. when I made that decision as a way to protect. I closed off some aliveness. And seeing that was not just a mental process. I knew that I had to really fully let it know that I saw it, which meant sort of embodying it and feeling it. So there were sensations in the body that had to do with a sense of deep grief. And allowing that to move, simply allowing that resistance to move and flow, opened up in some extraordinary ways. I began to feel more space in my chest that I hadn't felt in a really, really long time. So the practice is to open to what is here. And to sense if it feels safe to really be with it. To make room for it. All the other great metaphors. To have tea with your demons. As I kept coming back at different times to sort of explore that deep metaphor of death and letting go, there was lots of spontaneous thoughts of people that I felt I had wronged. Moments of my life of realizing how I just sort of shut down, closed myself off. So when you are deeply with the transformational process of meditation, there is another element which is kind of overriding and underlining everything, which in many ways is sort of the initial part, but it's actually the self-reinforcing part, which is to really reflect on what you're most committed to. What do you most want in your life? As I reflected on this, I could really sense, in part through some of the reading I was doing, but also in my own reflection, that when you are without fear, there is a natural capacity for joy that arises. You know, if you imagine sort of coming out of your life and told you can just come back for 1 hour, you know, what would you do? What would you say? There's sort of this rush of gratitude and appreciation. And then the really kind of horrible question is, what's between us and feeling that more? Which becomes a very powerful inquiry. What's between me and feeling free? What's between me and feeling happy? We don't have to really look. It'll find us. So, for myself, I reaffirmed a commitment to what I call unconditional happiness. That's the intent that came out of my retreat. And having said that, and that's just the words that kind of work for me now, I fully understand that requires a commitment. That if something arises and I'm not happy, a commitment to look at that. What is the attitude in my mind? How am I holding this? And it's already proved to be quite an interesting ride. So when you feel called to a meditation practice, perhaps even as just a way to sort of moderate your blood pressure, or perhaps as a deeper way of actually unwinding, old tensions, there is a quality of commitment that's required. Many people tend to begin meditation and find sort of this initial rush, and then the challenges arise. Through the sensitivity you're cultivating, you become more self-aware. You become more aware of what's between you and feeling happy. And that requires a commitment to stay in it. It's described as swimming upstream against your own conditioning, but also in many ways, even more the conditioning of the culture. So part of commitment requires really knowing what is it that you return to. What are the words or the phrase or the feeling inside that you return back to? Perhaps just simply to come home. Yeah, some teachers I know, they just sort of use a word. They're sort of like arriving. That becomes sort of like their intention. I'm just arriving. Or home. So let's do a short reflection on this. If you like, you can close your eyes. And in your own way, let your attention just settle. Settle with the breath, and settle into your body. And you might just notice this experience of your mind. Can you notice the narrative, or the commentary? And can you sense who is aware of this process of the narrative? Can be just a simple coming back. The anchor of the breath, or just the vibration of the sound. It's a quality of relaxation here that adds to this quality of sensing. And you might just sense the quality of energy, the quality of feeling in your body. How your body is holding this moment and sensing what it's like to hold that with open attention. Over these next moments, you might just reflect on the following question, and it'll give you some time to simply notice what arises. If nothing arises spontaneously, take the time just to create some words that resonate best for you. At this time in your life, and in your practice, what are you most committed to? And just letting that inquiry go. There is a quality of pure, embodied aliveness. A sense of vibration, of pulse, of warmth, a movement of breath. There's also a quality of feeling tone, of Vedana. This shifting of sensation into a formation of pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. Just sense for a moment if you can sense that, however subtle. There's a quality of thought forms, of the commentary, of images, sound, memory, all moving in its own way. Sensing how and what everything in your experience is changing. And perhaps what it's like to simply hold it with non-judging presence, a quality of allowing. And gently deepening the breath. Remaining with the eyes closed if you like, or you can have them open. One of the insights that I had from my retreat, which I'm not sure I've fully registered, is a relationship. The only way I can describe it is between death and creativity. The more I found a sense of holding the reality of my own passing and those around me, I could feel correspondingly a lightening inside, and in that more energy, more freedom. It seems like so much of our life we are always going through a sorting process of what feels good, what feels bad, and living our life accordingly. And when you're drawn to practices that have the possibility of changing and shifting your life, there can be a very strong call to that, because they can indeed do that. And that's where the commitment piece is important, to remember what's most important. Because oftentimes we stop practicing precisely because it's working. One of the things that I experienced and felt this morning, coming back to the memorial, was a deep sense of gratitude for the church for making this space available, where we can have this room and this space available freely for anyone, no charge. Your support allows me to continue to do what I do. And truly for me, stopping to pause, just to put it in neutral, and to do it in the company of like-minded people. It's the best game in town. I'm very, very grateful. It's great to be back.